Welcome to the political frontline. On the background of the military conflict in the Donbas region, the question of annexation of the Crimea rarely heard in political statements of Ukrainian and European politics. Today we will analyze the situation in Crimea and the East conflict. My guest today is Envoy Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, the Consul General of Ukraine in Istanbul, Ukraine's representative to the Black Sea Economic Cooperation and Chairman of the Board of Maidan of Foreign Affairs, Bogdan. Welcome to Political Frontline.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And so annexation has happened. On Putin's opinion, he has accomplished one of his numerous tasks. But what he wants to do with the Crimea? Is there any plan?
Well, thank you for this question. In reality, the analysis of the situation in Crimea is one of the key priorities or area of the key priority for my NGO. And analyzing the prehistory of the annexation as well as the process of annexation itself, we came to conclusion that President Putin and Russian Federation, they worked out the very detailed and really skillful plan of annexation itself. So they are masters of tactics. So they reached the final, let's say, aim of their plan. But what then happened, at least in our understanding, Mr. Putin and Russian Federation have no idea what to do with Crimea in the future. So they have no plan and no strategy for future. The best example for this would be that I would say that for the occupation authorities, or let's say for Russian Federation, the primarily task would be after the annexation to decrease the dependency of Crimean Peninsula from the continental Ukraine. And it is known that 2 or 3 years ago, the Crimean Peninsula was dependent on supplies on food and other products from Ukraine on 45–50%. But what has happened after the annexation, that this dependency basically was doubled. And right now, Crimean Peninsula, dependent on the supplies of nutrition and other products from Ukraine, is raised for 85–90%. So it means that the authorities, so-called authorities of Crimean Peninsula, as well as the central federal government of Russian Federation, has no plan for future, has no idea what to do, how to do, to reach the aim of creating the sustainable authorities and regime in Crimean Peninsula.
Does the Kremlin has any strategy of supplying to Crimea? I mean food, energy and so on?
Well, again, judging from the fact that the dependency of Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine in all of the spheres that you mentioned, electricity, water supplies, products, nutrition, so on, is just rising. It means that they have no alternative plan but just to reach an agreement with Ukraine that those important things, vital things, would be supplied or provided by Ukraine. So it means that they have no idea how to decrease the dependency of peninsula from the continental Ukraine. And it should be, this provides for our country an important means on influence on Crimean situation and on the Russian government. So I mean, by this I mean that the possible blockade of Crimean Peninsula should be the instrument we need or we must to exercise to reach certain aims. But of course the strategic aim of Ukraine is quite simple, is to gain back the control over the peninsula. So it is quite clear that Russian Federation has no ability to decrease dependency of Crimea from continental Ukraine, and this should be a stimulus for Ukraine to go ahead and to use blockade as an important tool of Crimean policy.
And should the Ukraine supply their food, energy, water?
That's an interesting question, because a lot of people are speculating that blockade would harm the average people. In reality, according to international law, as well as the Ukrainian national legislation, the full responsibility over the supplies or providing all necessary things and tools of existence to the Crimean Peninsula or to any occupied region lies on the country occupying it. So it means that it is up to Russia to, as it's decided to occupy Crimea, now Russia should find a way of supplying this peninsula. But in reality, the blockade could arrange the way that it would harm the business of governments, or the supplies provided by the large companies, because strangely enough, most of the Ukrainian retailers or resellers, companies, I don't want to name them, they have both their stores and shops in Ukraine and in occupied Crimea. So, and they continue to supply it. So I believe it is important instrument for Ukraine to stop it, because you cannot serve two masters. You should be loyal to Ukraine or to Russia, and it is up to business to make this choice. But in reality, Ukraine should not be preventing average citizens or Ukrainian citizens in Crimea to travel through their, well, it is not the border in the legal understanding of this term, but through their dividing line between continental Ukraine and Crimean Peninsula to buy certain things. So we could arrange the blockade as the means of preventing the supplies by Russian Federation or by large systematic businesses, but at the same time we should not be creating any obstacles on the way of average citizens of moving both ways. I mean, Ukrainian citizens traveling into Crimea or back from Crimea to Ukraine to buy certain supplies, to buy certain things. So it could be done the way that the citizens, especially the local citizens, inhabitants of Crimean Peninsula, will have all necessary means to supply themselves without any assistance of the Russian government.
What about the Black Sea countries? I mean, Turkey, Romania, Bulgaria. Do they support Crimea?
Well, if we're talking about the NATO and EU countries, their position is explicit, because during the course of the last year there were a number of summits of EU and NATO, and the decisions of those summits are quite simple. They consider their, the formal decisions which were decided by all member states, including Romania, Bulgaria and Turkey, named by you. So the position is quite simple, that annexation is illegal and the whole responsibility on the situation lies upon Russia. But in reality, I would say that Bulgaria and Romania not just supporting this vision and this position, but also they have experiencing the big deal of frustration over Russia's foreign policy, and they feel endangered by Russian foreign policy. So they just not supporting Ukraine, but also trying to prevent the same situation to be repeated on their soils. Should we talk about Turkey, it's slightly a different story. Being a loyal partner to Ukraine and supporting the NATO decisions over annexation, claiming annexation illegal, Turkey in reality providing or supporting the policy which is undermining this situation. So there we saw numerous attempts of Turkish businesses to arrange the air transit or air supplies or air connections between Turkey and Crimea. Numerous attempts and situations with the Turkish or vessels under the Turkish flags entering the Crimean ports. Also, we heard some statements done by Turkish officials that they working with Russian Federation in the context of providing certain guarantees or rights to the Crimean Tatars, which is totally against the position of supporting Ukrainian territorial integrity. So it's quite strange position. So it's a mixed, I have a mixed feeling regarding Turkey. It's a kind of split position or divided position. By words, Turkey is supporting Ukraine. By deeds, it's something else.
Does these countries support their brothers and sisters, I mean Muslims?
Well, the Muslim factor is not the major factor. When we're talking about the annexation Crimea, because it was totally political campaign by Russian or military campaign, military or special forces operation provided by Russian Federation, and of course Russia was using the ethnic factor or the factor of the Ruski Mir as their excuse to invade Ukraine and to annex the territory, and of course Muslim factor was something aside. But what has happened later on, that the Crimean Tatars, who are mostly the representatives of the Muslim community, or almost 100% the representatives of the Muslim community, they felt endangered by the activities of Russian Federation. Of course, Crimean Tatars is a very important factor for Turkish internal policy and foreign policy, because Crimean Tatars has a huge representation within Turkey. It is one of the largest ethnic groups or minorities in Turkey, and of course any Turkish government would not be in a position to ignore the frustration or the needs of Crimean Tatars. But in reality, again, this is a game which is conducted by the Turkish government, so they speculating on the issue, in reality not supporting Crimean Tatars, but trying to reach a certain agreement with Russian Federation how to treat this group in order not to harm their bilateral trade or whatever it is. So again, the Turkish position over the Crimean Tatars as the Muslim, predominantly Muslim group is also quite strange. I do not truly believe that they're supporting anyone.
Does the Kremlin has any strategy to Crimean Tatars?
Well, they do. So they have the tactics. They're trying to destroy this, the unity of this nation. They're trying to put tremendous, or they're doing this already. Let's say a couple of days ago, they surrounded the only Crimean Tatars TV station, ATR, under some stupid, let's say, yes, idea of searching, yes, searching it for some evidences. That's quite difficult to explain even what was the reason to do this. So, but anyway, what was the official reason provided by Russian side? It is quite obvious that Russia is trying to push Crimean Tatars because Crimean Tatars are quite loyal towards Ukraine. They consider Ukraine to be their only chance to development as the nation. So I believe Russia would continue to keep a pressure on Crimean Tatars, to split them on different groups, and then to rule them, to make them loyal to Russia or to make them silenced. Also, they would push, probably what they would do, they would try to push the most active members of this community and this nation out of Crimea, no matter what, to Turkey, to Ukraine, wherever they want to go, but at least they would try to decrease the tension within the Crimean Peninsula to make it more safer for Russian troops located over there, because the only strategy we see on the side of Russia is turning Crimean Peninsula into the huge military base.
You have mentioned about the military base. Is it possible that Russia locates their nuclear missile?
Well, there are reports in media, or all over the media, since at least summer last year, that the nuclear weapons are already there. And it should be noted that the facilities to keep and to storage nuclear weapons were there since the period of the Soviet Union. They were not in use during the year ago because Ukraine didn't have the nuclear arms. Nevertheless, so the capacities are there. There were reports which have never been denied, both by local authorities, so-called Crimean authorities, and federal authorities of Russian Federation. So also we know that the military contingent of Russia in Crimea was at least doubled, and it should be, right now, it should be around 40,000 soldiers. Also, we saw the relocation of strategic bombers of Russian Federation to Crimean Peninsula capable of carrying the nuclear weapons. So there are enough evidence to believe that nuclear weapons are already there.
My guest today, the Consul General of Ukraine in Istanbul, Ukraine representative to the Black Sea Economic Cooperation and chairman of the board of Maidan of Foreign Affairs, Bogdan Yeremenko. What are the possible scenarios in the east part of Ukraine?
Well, Denis, first of all, we would need to analyze the recent situation, what's happening over there, in order to create some scenarios for future. In this respect, I fully support the decision of Ukrainian Parliament to call Russia aggressor, and by this naming the situation on the east of Ukraine as a war between Ukraine and Russian Federation. I believe only this understanding can provide us with the real tools of analyzing the situation. So, because as far as we will be thinking about anti-terrorism campaign or something like this, it would be misleading us, and it would be leading us some opposite direction from the truth. So, if we would be talking about war between Ukraine and Russia, then it will be quite simple. So, Ukraine must become stronger. First of all, in building its capacity to defend its soil. Ukraine should create the international coalition which would support Ukrainian actions both on the front line on the eastern Ukraine and also diplomatically trying to decrease pressure over Russia. Also, Ukraine should basically seek more support on behalf of the international community. In the sphere of implementing more and additional sanctions, economic sanctions against Russian Federation. And this might lead us at the end to the situation when Russia would lose an interest and ability to continue a war in Ukraine. Otherwise, Russia would continue to keep a pressure, because none of the real aims of Russian Federation was reached in Ukraine, and I believe Ukraine is still an independent sovereign country capable of carrying its sovereign independent foreign and defense policy, and of course Russia considers it to be, especially in the light of the situation that Ukraine is trying to rebuild, reconstruct and to improve democratic institutions. So it presents a danger for Russian regime, ruling party. And that's why Russia would continue to keep a pressure on Ukraine to destroy the country. And should Ukraine be unable to mobilize all resources, international and internal, to defend itself, probably Russia could succeed.
If you have mentioned about the influence, is it possible to influence on Putin? What are the levers?
Well, it's already been said, and it's quite obvious, and it's already been done. International sanctions, economic, financial, and other political sanctions, diplomatic pressure over the Kremlin.
Maybe coercive diplomacy?
The diplomacy is an important tool, but among the diplomats, and we see no attempts to be diplomatic on the part of Russia. So Russia is exercising more and more the military powers instead of diplomacy to resolve the situation. Russia is financing the terrorists on the Ukrainian soil. So it's against the diplomatic approaches. So by this I mean that the most useful tool would be international sanctions, so which would lead to the basically situation that Russia would lose the most of the resources to continue the war. And I believe the sanctions which already been introduced, and some of the sanctions that under the discussion that might be introduced in the nearest future, is the only real means to influence Russian Federation and President Putin.
Does the International Criminal Court can be one of the leverage over the Putin?
Well, I would like to see it happen at some point, but in reality, we shouldn't forget that Russia is still the second largest army in the world, with the nuclear capacities, with the ability to strike first, with the intention to strike first. So let's first of all try to stop Russian invasion in Ukraine, and then we will see what would happen to President Putin in terms of the possibility of bringing him to justice.
What about your vision about Ukraine's strategy in the East?
Well,
should we force, or should we just protect and so on?
Well, quite honestly, I do not I do not trust anymore the Minsk settlement or Minsk agreements. None of the sides, I mean Russian Federation or those regimes in Lugansk and Donetsk, are even trying to implement them or to fulfill them. So I believe it would be in the best interest of Ukraine to change the policy, to start more active defense policy in the eastern part of Ukraine, and also to change the attitude towards the negotiations. I believe we must invite United States and EU to the table of negotiations, and to change, and it is the most important issue, to change the subject of the negotiation or of the settlement of the negotiations. Instead, because the recent agenda was basically provided by President Putin. Instead of discussing the militaristic, aggressive foreign policy or Russian invasion, not just in Ukraine, but in other countries in the region, we are discussing the de-escalation in the east of Ukraine. But it is just a part of the larger picture, and this larger picture should be brought to the table of negotiations. I mean, the annexation of Crimean Peninsula, the withdrawal, the necessity to withdrawal Russian 14th Army from Transnistria, the settlement in Georgia, those part of country which was occupied by Russian Federation and then proclaimed as independent countries. So it's a broader agenda, and should we be able of bringing this agenda to on the table of negotiations, it would basically create certain perspectives of diplomatic solution. Should we continue to discuss military conflict in the east of Ukraine, it means that the best we could achieve de-escalation. But Crimea would stay Russian, Transnistria would stay occupied, the Georgia would be suffering, so there will be no real result for the whole region.
Spoken about European society and the world society, do they really know what is happening in Ukraine?
Well, again, it's a difficult question, because it depends whom we would be talking about when we're talking about society. Yes, on the part of the governments of EU and NATO, we have full-scale support, maybe with the only exception, but I feel and I hope that it is temporarily the most recent decision or the statement of the new Greece government. So far, all EU and NATO countries, governments are supporting Ukraine. They naming the annexation illegal. They supporting again making statements after statement supporting territorial integrity, sovereignty of our country. Should we try to discuss the situation within the society of those countries, I mean NATO members and EU members, then we might find the situation slightly different or different. But nevertheless, I believe the majority of the people, and this is the crucial moment for Ukraine to understand, that the majority of people in those countries are supporting the same values that Ukrainians are supporting. The peace, loyalty to the country, human rights, dignity, and it makes us natural allies. So even if they don't understand the reality of the situation in Ukraine, those people in European countries would definitely support the values that Ukraine is standing for. So yes, Ukraine should continue working or should expand its information and diplomatic presence in all European countries, and not just in the European countries, in Russia, and we should start working with the Russian society as well, explaining our vision of the future, our truth about Ukrainian revolution, about what Ukraine is really thinking about its own destiny and future, also about Belarus and Belarusian society. But in reality, I believe, and it's a very fortunate situation for Ukraine, that so far we have a solid support on behalf of their European and not just European governments, and I would say the majority of the people in those countries would be very realistic about the real reasons of the war between Ukraine and Russia and would support Ukraine.
Just to finish on some optimistic note, which optimism you seen in previous events in the West?
Well, I believe two things we should discuss answering this question. First of all is the readiness of Ukrainians and Ukraine to sacrifice, to stand for their rights, I mean for the rights of Ukrainians and for their country, and also the solid position of our friends and allies in Europe, among the European and NATO members, to support us, both in the field of withstanding the Russian aggression, and also in the field of internal transformation, which we didn't touch upon in this brief show, but nevertheless it is the most important, probably as important as the issue internal reforms as the military aggression of the Russian Federation. So we have the full-scale support, and we have their intentions to continue to do so, and I believe those two factors would lead us in some time would lead us to the very positive developments, to the victory.
So, Bogdan Yeremenko, thanks for being on Political Frontline. My guest today was Envoy Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, the Consul General of Ukraine in Istanbul, Ukraine's representative to the Black Sea Economic Cooperation and Chairman of the Board of Maidan of Foreign Affairs, Bogdan Yeremenko.